In my humble opinion, if you are in the mob forming against Ethel Cain, you are more interested in self righteous, useless indignation and much less concerned with actual racial and social justice. And what's more, your behavior is more in line with puritanical Republicans than it is with actual leftism. And furthermore, you are engaged in the weaponization of identity politics and cancel culture, which, if left continued to be unchecked, is going to kill us all. So, what do I mean by any of this? Well, very recently, as you may already know, Ethel Cain had some comments. A previous, we'll say, edgelord identity was unearthed, where it was discovered that Ethel Cain made racist remarks back in the day. Also, there's some other stuff sprinkled in there. There's a lot. Also, her statement about everything is also very lengthy, so I'm not going to get into that, but please Google it. It's important to read it. It's important to understand everything that's happening. But people discovered that, got really mad. Ethel Cain made a statement, and her apology, her comments aren't good enough for some people. And that's basically the situation. And I'm just coming on here to say that I cannot believe that this is still the cycle that we are experiencing on the left almost a decade after 2016, when Hillary Clinton successfully weaponized identity politics to pillory and undercut the left. I cannot believe that this is still the kind of discourse that we're having. So, if I can just address you directly, if you are the kind of person that is extremely enraged with Ethel Cain and you are insisting that she be deplatformed over this video is for you. So that's more or less the situation, and now this is why I think you are making a terrible mistake and why this behavior is like perfectly emblematic of why the left in America will never have actual political power until something dramatic changes. The first point I want to make, this idea that there's no grace for past mistakes, this idea that anything you have ever said can always be used and hung over your head your entire life, I think is ridiculous and also an impossibly high standard. Not only do I think most of us have had a memory of ours where we said something insensitive or downright hurtful and malicious at least once in our entire lives, but the belief that we are only as good as our worst mistakes, I think is such a cynical and bitter perspective to have on not just yourself, but humanity at large. If we are only ever as good as the worst thing we've ever said or done, then what is the point of this political project in the first place? Is leftism, is socialism, is social justice not predicated on emotional understanding and equity? So, if you've ever stepped out of line once and there's photo or video evidence of it, or there's a post online in some disparate forum somewhere, that you are not only disqualified from participating in the social project, but you must now disown yourself and disown your own platform and just fade away into nothing. What is the actual utility in that? What is actually gained by going after somebody like Ethel Cain and essentially trying to destroy their career for this? What is the point? You might say to yourself that it's accountability, but what is the point of accountability? Accountability isn't punishment. The point of accountability is not to just destroy somebody that stepped out of line once in their life. Accountability is about ownership and growing as a person. Taking accountability is about recognizing what you did wrong and then growing and moving past that experience. If the average response from leftists is that Ethel Cain should be canceled and her societal contributions should be like, no longer valid, what's the there's no accountability in that at all. That's just purely punitive. That's just pure punishment. There's actually no utility in that whatsoever. This is just punishment, pure, plain, and simple. This is not about growth. This is not about trying to hold them to account, because if that were the case, the statement that Ethel Cain would have been enough. But it's not enough, because it's not about accountability. It's just about punishment, basically. And the second argument I want to make, this idea that there's no growth, no room for rehabilitation, accountability means the destruction of your entire persona online, makes the leftist movement generally extremely toxic. Why would why would any random schmuck join this movement if, from their perspective, they had to tiptoe on eggshells and hide their entire lived history from the internet, from their friends or family, whoever? Who would join a movement like that? Especially if they feel like they are not the person who made problematic mistakes in the past. If they are the kind of person that is considering joining a leftist movement, if they have done some of the work, if they have looked at what the society around them has to offer and has decided it can be better, why the fuck would they jump in with this lot who is so eager, ravenous even, to tear down somebody like Ethel Cain? Do you want to be in a political movement like that, where you are only as good as the worst thing you've ever said or done is? Like, that seems fucking awful. Again, the term puritanical comes up, and if you don't know what puritanical means, it is basically when God himself pre-selected who gets to go to heaven and who doesn't. And what does this mean in context of this? Puritanism in this context would mean that, like, the only people that are allowed to be leftists were the ones that were allowed to live in a house that was fucking flawless when it comes to social justice, that were allowed to have an upbringing that somehow completely immunized them from any sort of errant, mistakable, regrettable thought patterns or beliefs, that managed to reach adulthood with never having stepped out of line or made a mistake or made a racially insensitive comment or discriminatory comment or whatever the fuck it is. That is the only sort of leftist that is allowed to be extremely vocal and outspoken in this environment, in this instance. And that's, again, that person doesn't exist. That cannot be the foundation for a movement at all. A movement that is just, with gritted teeth, just so eager to destroy people for something like this, we're never gonna make it. This is not how you build a movement at all. This is not how you win. How is this a sustainable political movement? This idea that you can only be a true leftist if your soul is just completely unblemished and has always been completely unblemished. Why is the present so flippantly disregarded when it comes to this? Why is somebody reforming? Why is somebody who came to terms with a version of themselves that they didn't like and grew into something better, why is that so meaningless to you all? Seriously. Why? Like, because what is the point of all of this if not to facilitate and celebrate change like that? The fact that these comments came from Ethel Cain a decade ago, but not last year, the year before, 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 and so on, that is fucking awesome, in my opinion. That is evidence for change. That is evidence for people changing. And that should be fucking celebrated, because this change motivated somebody to be a better person. This hyper-fixation on past comments is just gonna fucking kill leftism perpetually in America forever. Things that happened a long time ago, contextually, can be very important, can be very relevant. But in this case, their behavior clearly is not in line with these comments made 10 years ago. And the distance isn't what makes this easy for people like me to not hyperfixate on. That the time is only the metric by which we measure the progress, that we measure the growth. If these comments were made yesterday, hypothetically, that would probably indicate that these are pretty top of mind beliefs that Ethel Cain has. But the fact that these were made 10 years ago, again, the time is not the neutralizing factor here, but it's just peace of mind that because the frequency of these comments is so infrequent, it would suggest that Ethel Cain doesn't believe this anymore. And if they don't believe this anymore, if they are not racially insensitive anymore, that's good. That's actually great. Wish they didn't make those comments in the first place, but given that they have, isn't it nice that they don't think that anymore? Am I saying we should never attack people for making racially insensitive comments? No, of course not. But I think the present has to be acknowledged when talking about this. If these are comments made in the past and there is evidence to suggest that these are not current beliefs, I think that should be celebrated. And if you are personally hurt by them, I'm not even saying that's invalid. I think if you are somebody that really values and maybe even celebrated Ethel Cain when this news came out and you felt personally touched by those comments, I'm not asking you to not feel bad or sad or disappointed about that. But let us take the totality of this situation into context. I don't think anybody benefits from weaponizing these past comments against Ethel Cain like this. I don't even think you benefit from this personally, but it's one man's thoughts. And this story has broken into the mainstream, by the way. I saw an article on USA Today about this. So, for the people in your life that are not as racially sensitive as you might be, who maybe make or believe problematic, incorrect things, and this is the discourse that they're exposed to, that this is the kind of discourse happening in online leftist spaces, why the fuck would they feel welcomed in this world? If this is the grace we have for someone like Ethel Cain, why the fuck would they join us? I wouldn't. It's for shit like this that I no longer enjoy calling myself a leftist, because now it feels tainted and associated with this fucking dipshittery. I don't know how else to describe it. This shit sounds how Republicans sound when they talk about illegal aliens or criminals, who, if you've committed a crime, they're okay if you get shot or thrown in a gulag and deported. They don't give a single shit about rehabilitation or accountability or justice. They just want to see people hurt who they believe fucked up and stepped out of line. That's reactionary thinking. You, if you are fired up by this whole thing, are engaged in reactionary thinking. How about that? And that leads me to my last point. I genuinely believe that the reason this happens so often in leftist spaces is because I think a lot of leftists are feeling acutely insecure. I think a lot of leftists don't feel like they have a lot of power in their personal lives or in their political lives. And then when situations like these come along, this is a very rare moment for them to feel catharsis, to feel superior, perhaps, than someone else who has apparent power, has apparent influence. And that explains why it's not about accountability, it's about punishment. That explains why the amount of time between the comments, the incidents, the whatever it is, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it was a month, 5 years, 10 years ago, whatever. It doesn't matter, because it's not about accountability. It's about feeling like you have control. I truly believe this in my heart of hearts, because if it were motivated by something else, it wouldn't be so fucking vicious. And I only know this because I used to be one of you insufferable dipshits a few years ago. When I was the most insecure and most unhinged, I had the worst, most reactionary politics I've ever had. In 2020, I had recently broken up with my long-term girlfriend, or rather, she broke up with me. I had dedicated my entire life to what I would consider in hindsight very performative activism, but also for the part that wasn't performative and was actual work, I was volunteering and a actual paid on the payroll member of the Bernie Sanders campaign. We knocked on hundreds of doors in Nevada, and it was the only state that we outperformed in. And for some reason, the Bernie campaign decided to not do any more paid canvassing programs. And my team lead in Nevada decided that was stupid, and he organized a guerrilla group of Bernie people to knock on doors in Chicago to rectify that mistake. I think of that Nick Fury. The council made a decision, but I think it's a stupid ass decision, so I've made a different decision. That quote comes to mind. I was in Chicago when the campaign died and COVID set in, and it was now officially clear that not only was Bernie going to lose a second time, but in my mind, our last best hope against climate change was cooked, and it was over, and it was going to be Joe versus Trump. The kinds of comments I was making online at this time, the sort of activism I engaged in when BLM protests really took off, was fucking horrific. And none of it was actually about changing things like I thought it was, but emotionally, it was just about channeling this rage and despair I felt. And admittedly, there was a lot to be enraged and despairing about, right? But it also made me very blind. When the BLM protests took off, on the surface, I thought I was participating because it aligned with a lot of my beliefs already. We're in desperate need of police reform. The murder of George Floyd was totally, completely unjustified, and this was an avenue to express that. And not to say that wasn't part of it, but I think a major emotional motivation for participating in all those protests, was this sense of despair and powerlessness that was manifesting in a very toxic way. And I don't mean just participating in the protests being toxic. I mean the kinds of shit that I was saying and how I was saying it was not moving the political needle in the direction that it would need to go to benefit anybody. I think about this quote where it's like, if your leftism is empowered by anger and not love and compassion, it's very noticeable. And I think I know what that means now, because the kinds of, I was very reactionary at this time. That anger and that frustration and that feeling of betrayal turned me into like a tanky for a couple of months there. A very regrettable time in my life where I felt like there was some kind of satisfaction in being edgy and having more extreme political takes than liberals or other leftists in my political sphere. Just very cringy time, if I'm going to be completely honest. But again, it wasn't about the social justice. It was just about these feelings of anger and needing to feel something, some kind of power. And a lot of the people I'd surrounded myself with at that time would fuel that. Would the more extreme, the more politically extreme and vitriolic my takes were, my rhetoric was, the bigger the thumbs up was. So yeah, that's what informs this opinion. I truly believe these moments of dogpiling can be traced back to this feeling of feeling powerlessness and seeing an opportunity to try and claw your way into some kind of validation from peers who are similarly experiencing an extremely despairing environment and worldview. People who act this way do not have great internal worlds. I truly believe that. Not that that's like a means to attack you or denigrate you, but it just means there's shit going on in your life and you should fix it. I truly believe that your political activism has to come from compassion and understanding, because otherwise it's going to come from reactionary thought. And as a result of that, in my opinion, is going to continually undermine the left and leftist power building for all time. Cancel culture has clearly only benefited the right, which is so sad because it was invented to try and take down problematic figures on the right. It has not worked at all. And if we keep weaponizing identity politics and cancel culture in this way, I think we're all going to die. And that's basically the premise of the video. I think the last thing I want to close off with is I have seen a lot of people in comment sections in articles about this Ethel Cain situation dismissing a whole lot of discourse because the people who are making some of these comments are white. That's fucking pathetic. If you disagree with my message, make an argument, make an actual identifiable point, and don't shoot the messenger because I'm not POC. That's fucking bullshit. That is intellectual cowardice, and you know it. If you have a problem with my take, spell it out. Don't hide behind that shit. That is another thing about this cancel culture shit that drives me fucking crazy. Because I'm not even insinuating that my argument is foolproof. If you have an argument, make it. But don't just dismiss it because I'm not POC. That's all I ask. Okay? Anyway, that's it for this video. I have been talking for an hour and a half. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but that's it. Peace and love and, I don't know, love your fellow man.